The Untold Stories, Nazi Wives After World War II. When the guns fell silent across Europe in May 1945, Allied forces expected to find the architects of the Holocaust hiding in bunkers and mountain retreats. But many of the Third Reich's most notorious figures had already fled or taken their own lives. What investigators found instead were their wives, living in stolen luxury, surrounded by children, and claiming they knew nothing about the crimes committed in their husbands' names. These weren't just ordinary housewives caught up in extraordinary times. Many were ardent supporters of the Nazi ideology, active participants in the regime's social machinery, and beneficiaries of wealth stolen from millions of victims. Some lived in villas overlooking concentration camps. Others hosted lavish parties while trains carried people to their deaths. And when the war ended, nearly all of them had the same story. They were innocent, devoted wives who never questioned their husband's work. But were they really innocent bystanders? Or were they accomplices to some of history's greatest crimes? Let's take a closer look at what happened to the Nazi wives after World War II, and the question that still haunts historians today: did they face justice, or did they simply disappear into comfortable obscurity? Magda Goebbels, the true believer. Magda Goebbels was born in 1901, into a comfortable Berlin family. She married a wealthy industrialist in 1921, enjoying the privileges of high society. But it wasn't enough. In 1930, she attended a Nazi rally where Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's chief propagandist, delivered a fiery speech. She was captivated, not by his appearance, he was short with a pronounced limp from a club foot, but by his intelligence, his conviction, and the power of his words. Within months she had divorced her first husband, joined the Nazi Party, and begun an affair with Goebbels. Hitler himself attended their wedding on December 19, 1931, serving as best man. Magda was already pregnant. She would eventually have 6 children with Goebbels, all given names beginning with the letter H, in honor of Hitler. She organized social events for the wives of high-ranking SS officers, hosted propaganda films in her home, and became Hitler's confidante. Despite her husband's numerous affairs, including a scandalous relationship with a Czech actress that nearly destroyed his career, Magda remained devoted to both Goebbels and the Nazi cause. As Allied forces closed in on Berlin in April 1945, the Goebbels family moved into the Führer bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery. There had been multiple offers to evacuate the children to safety, but Magda refused them all. On April 30th, hours after Hitler's suicide, she made a decision that would shock the world. She had an SS dentist inject her 6 children, aged 4 to 12, with morphine to render them unconscious. Then, one by one, she crushed cyanide capsules into their mouths. Their names were Helga, Hildegard, Helmut, Holdine, Hedwig, and Heidrun. The oldest was 12, the youngest was 4. The following day, May 1, 1945, Magda and Joseph Goebbels walked into the Reich Chancellery garden. They took cyanide, and an SS officer shot their bodies to ensure death. Their corpses were partially burned, and later discovered by Soviet troops. Magda Goebbels was 43 years old. Before her death, she wrote a final letter to her adult stepson from her first marriage. The world that comes after the Führer and National Socialism is not worth living in. She meant it, and she took her children with her. Here's something to consider. Magda had opportunities to save her children, to leave Berlin, to choose life. Was her decision the act of a devoted ideologue, or something far more sinister? What would you have done in that situation? Gerda Bormann, the fanatic. If Magda Goebbels was a true believer, Gerda Bormann was perhaps even more fanatical. Born Gerda Buch in 1909, she grew up in a family of Nazi enthusiasts. Her father introduced her to Uncle Adolf when she was still a young woman, and she joined the party before she even met her future husband. In 1929, she married Martin Bormann, a stocky, ruthless party operative who would eventually become Hitler's private secretary. It was a marriage built on shared ideology and ambition. Gerda wholeheartedly believed in Nazi racial theories and the concept of expanding the German population at any cost. Her views on marriage and reproduction were shocking, even by Nazi standards. She believed that monogamy was outdated, and that every German man should be legally allowed to marry multiple women. The goal, she argued, was to produce as many Aryan children as possible. She even encouraged her own husband to have affairs and father children with other women, proposing that he visit her every 2 weeks while maintaining relationships with others. Gerda practiced what she preached. She had 10 children with Martin Bormann, naming their first son Adolf after Hitler himself, who served as the boy's godfather. Despite her husband's numerous infidelities, she remained devoted to him and the Nazi cause, managing their household and maintaining her status as a prominent Nazi wife. As the Soviet Red Army advanced on Berlin in April 1945, Gerda fled south with her 9 youngest children. Martin took their oldest son and remained in the Führer bunker. It would be the last time they saw each other. Bormann disappeared during a breakout attempt from Berlin and was presumed dead, though his body wasn't found until decades later. Gerda, using forged documents and posing as the director of a children's home, successfully crossed into Italy. 4 of her children were disguised as orphans. They settled in a remote village in South Tyrol, 30 miles from Bolzano, where a regional Nazi official had arranged shelter for them. But Gerda was dying. For months she had suffered excruciating pain from advanced ovarian cancer. A local Italian doctor examined her and immediately recognized the severity of her condition. She needed surgery, and quickly. British intelligence had been tracking her movements. When a British Army major arrived at her door, Gerda panicked, believing she would be sent to a concentration camp, but the major assured her she was safe. Instead, he arranged for her to be transferred to a prisoner of war hospital in Murano, where she underwent surgery. It was too late. The cancer had spread too far. Facing her imminent death, Gerda converted to Catholicism and sought spiritual comfort. On March 23, 1946, just 2 months before her 37th birthday, Gerda Bormann died. She left behind 9 orphaned children, a legacy of fanaticism, and letters expressing her undying loyalty to Hitler and the Nazi cause. She never expressed regret. She never renounced the ideology that led to the deaths of millions. Until her final breath, she remained a devoted Nazi. Ilse Hess, the loyal wife. Ilse Hess led a life defined by unwavering loyalty, not just to her husband, but to an ideology that destroyed Europe. Born Ilse Prohl, she met Rudolf Hess in the early 1920s. He was a decorated World War I veteran, with thick eyebrows, sunken eyes, and a haunted expression. She was immediately attracted to him. Their relationship was unusual from the start. Hess showed little interest in physical intimacy, and for years their relationship remained platonic. Instead, they bonded over German literature, romantic composers, and their shared belief in National Socialism. Ilse joined the Nazi Party in 1921, left when it was banned, and rejoined in 1925. It was Ilse who introduced Hess to Adolf Hitler. The three became inseparable. Hitler actively encouraged the relationship, and he played a significant role in pushing Hess toward marriage. On December 20, 1927, Rudolf and Ilse married in Munich. Hitler served as godfather to their only child, Wolf, born in 1937. As Hess rose through the Nazi ranks to become Hitler's deputy Führer, Ilse stood firmly by his side. She attended party functions, delivered propaganda leaflets, and worked tirelessly for the movement. She never questioned the regime's actions, the persecution of Jews, or the atrocities being committed in Germany's name. Then, on May 10, 1941, Rudolf Hess did something that shocked everyone. He flew solo to Scotland in a bizarre attempt to negotiate peace with Britain. British authorities immediately arrested him, and Hitler publicly denounced him as insane. Fearing Hitler's wrath, Ilse took their young son and retreated to the Bavarian town of Hindelang. When the war ended, Ilse faced denazification proceedings. Like many Nazi wives, she was arrested and sent to an internment camp in Augsburg. Allied investigators questioned her extensively about her knowledge of Nazi crimes and her role in the regime. She maintained that she was simply a devoted wife who supported her husband. On March 24, 1948, she was released. She settled in the Bavarian Alps and opened a guest house by 1955. For the next 4 decades, she visited her husband every weekend at Spandau prison, where he was serving a life sentence as one of the last remaining prisoners from the Nuremberg trials. Ilse Hess never renounced Nazism. She became an author, publishing books defending her husband and expressing support for the Nazi ideology. She provided financial support to Stille Hilfe, a secret organization that helped fugitive SS members escape justice. Her correspondence included letters to known Hitler admirers and neo-Nazis. Rudolf Hess died in Spandau prison in 1987 at the age of 93, the last prisoner held there. 8 years later, on September 7, 1995, Ilse Hess died at the age of 95. She requested to be buried next to her husband in Wonsiedel, Bavaria. Until her final breath, she remained loyal to Hitler, to her husband, and to the ideology that had caused immeasurable suffering. She lived a long life. She died peacefully. She never faced meaningful consequences for her support of the Nazi regime. Does this seem like justice to you? Or does it feel like something important was left unfinished? Lina Heydrich, the unrepentant Nazi princess. Lina von Osten was only 19 when she attended her first Nazi rally in 1929. Her older brother, already a committed member of the SA, took her to hear Hitler speak. She was instantly converted, joining the party immediately, and throwing herself into the movement with youthful enthusiasm. That same year at a rowing club ball in Kiel, she met Naval Lieutenant Reinhard Heydrich. He was tall, blonde, athletic, but with an unusually large head and narrow eyes. Lina found him intriguing. Beyond physical attraction, they shared something darker. Both believed in racial supremacy and the inferiority of most other people. Heydrich's naval career ended abruptly when he was dismissed for breaking an engagement promise to another woman. Facing unemployment and an uncertain future, it was Lina who suggested he join the SS. She helped arrange a meeting with Heinrich Himmler, who immediately recognized Heydrich's potential and appointed him chief of the SS Intelligence Service, later known as the SD. Heydrich's rise was meteoric. He became one of the principal architects of the Holocaust, earning the nickname the Butcher of Prague for his brutal administration of occupied Czechoslovakia. Lina stood by him throughout, hosting parties for SS officers, managing their household, and raising their children. In 1942, Czech resistance fighters assassinated Heydrich in Prague. Lina was made a widow at 30, pregnant with their fourth child. Hitler personally attended the funeral and awarded her a substantial estate in rural Bohemia, confiscated from Czech landowners. On this estate, Lina kept several prisoners of war as forced laborers. Survivors later testified that she physically abused them, beating them when they didn't work fast enough or failed to follow her orders. She lived in luxury while prisoners starved. As the war ended, Lina fled with her children to the island of Fehmarn. When Allied forces arrived, she was arrested and subjected to denazification proceedings. Despite clear evidence of her support for the Nazi regime and her abuse of prisoners, she was cleared of all charges in the late 1940s. Then came something truly shocking. In 1956 and again in 1959, Lina sued the West German government, arguing that as the widow of a German police general killed in action, she was entitled to a pension. Incredibly, she won. The courts agreed that regardless of her husband's crimes, she had a legal right to his pension as a fallen officer. Czechoslovakia tried her in absentia and sentenced her to life imprisonment for war crimes, but the sentence was never enforced. She lived comfortably in West Germany, managing Heydrich's former summer house as a restaurant and inn until it burned down in 1969. In 1965 she married a Finnish theatre director, primarily to change her surname and distance herself from her past. She never acknowledged the truth about her husband's crimes. She remained until the very end an unrepentant Nazi. Emmy Göring, the First Lady of the Third Reich. Emmy Sonnemann was a 38-year-old actress when she met Hermann Göring, the flamboyant head of the Luftwaffe and one of Hitler's closest associates. Unlike many Nazi wives, Emmy claimed to have little interest in politics. She portrayed herself as an artist concerned only with theatre, books and culture, but the reality was far more complicated. Emmy and Hermann married on April 10, 1935, in a lavish ceremony. Though she hadn't actively sought Nazi Party membership, she received it as a Christmas present in 1938. She quickly embraced her role as the self-proclaimed First Lady of the Third Reich, a title that created bitter rivalry with Eva Braun, Hitler's companion. Emmy hosted state functions, attended diplomatic events, and lived in extraordinary luxury. Her husband was one of history's most prolific art thieves, looting museums and private collections across occupied Europe. The couple owned mansions, estates and castles in Austria, Germany and Poland, all filled with stolen treasures. They employed servants, many of whom were likely forced laborers or concentration camp prisoners. When their daughter Edda was born, Hermann celebrated by ordering 500 planes to fly over Berlin in formation. He joked that he would have doubled the number if the child had been a boy. Emmy's rivalry with Eva Braun grew increasingly bitter. Eva resented Emmy's assumption of the First Lady title, and Emmy openly treated Eva with disdain. The situation became so uncomfortable that Hitler personally ordered Hermann to instruct his wife to show Eva proper respect. As punishment for her attitude, Emmy was banned from visiting Hitler's Bavarian retreat, the Berghof. Throughout the war, Emmy lived in splendor while millions suffered and died. She wore jewelry stolen from Jewish families. She decorated her homes with art looted from occupied territories. She hosted parties while the regime her husband served committed genocide. When the war ended, Hermann Göring was captured and brought to trial at Nuremberg. He was convicted of war crimes and crimes against humanity, but he cheated the hangman by taking cyanide hours before his scheduled execution. Emmy faced her own reckoning. A German denazification court found her guilty of being a Nazi and sentenced her to 1 year in prison. Upon her release, 30% of her wealth was confiscated, and she was banned from performing on stage for 5 years. After her release, Emmy moved into a small apartment in Munich, a dramatic fall from the palaces she once called home. She wrote an autobiography titled My Life with Göring, attempting to rehabilitate both her own image and her husband's legacy. Emmy Göring died on June 8. She had lived a long life, benefited from stolen wealth, and ultimately faced minimal consequences for her role in supporting one of the Third Reich's most powerful figures. The verdict history forgot. These 5 women represent just a fraction of the Nazi wives who lived through World War II and its aftermath. There were dozens more. Margarete Himmler, who oversaw Red Cross hospitals in occupied territories and died claiming ignorance of her husband's crimes. Hedwig Höss, who raised her children in a villa at Auschwitz and insisted she never knew what was happening in the camp visible from her garden. Gretel Braun, Eva's sister, who married an SS officer and lived quietly after the war, never speaking of her proximity to Hitler. What's striking about these stories isn't just what happened during the war, but what happened after. Most of these women faced minimal consequences. They were interrogated, briefly detained, and then released. Many received pensions. Some lived into their 80s and 90s, dying peacefully in their beds. They claimed ignorance. They said they were just devoted wives, concerned only with their children and households. They insisted they never knew about the concentration camps, the mass shootings, the systematic murder of 6 million Jews and millions of others. But the evidence tells a different story. These weren't passive bystanders. Many were active Nazi Party members who joined before their husbands rose to power. They hosted SS officers in their homes. They wore stolen jewelry. They lived in confiscated houses. Some, like Lina Heydrich, directly abused prisoners. Others, like Magda Goebbels, chose death over a world without Nazi ideology. The question isn't just whether these women knew about the Holocaust. Of course they knew. The question is whether they cared, and whether justice was ever truly served. When we remember World War II, we remember Hitler, Himmler, Goebbels, and Göring. We remember the Nuremberg trials and the hangman's noose. But we often forget the wives, the women who stood beside these men, benefited from their crimes, and then quietly disappeared into post-war society. History has a way of remembering the perpetrators, but forgetting the accomplices. These Nazi wives were more than just loyal spouses. They were believers, participants, and beneficiaries of a regime that committed the worst crimes in human history. Most of them lived long lives. Many died peacefully. Few expressed genuine remorse. In the end, they got away with it. And that might be the most disturbing part of their stories. Thanks for watching. The stories of these women raise difficult questions about complicity, justice, and historical memory. If you found this deep dive into history thought-provoking, we'd love to hear your perspective in the comments. See you in the next one.